Hey guys, it's Ryan here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing another comic book review. We're going to be looking at Arc 2 of The Forge, which is right here. This is issue number 4. Here's issue number 5, and issue number 6 is right there. And I don't have these in bags and boards because I only had 3 of those oversized boards in bags. So sadly, this is going to be flopping all over the place, but it should be fine. I'll put this down eventually, so it's all good. So yeah, like before, it's written by Greg Rucka and Eric Trautmann. It's drawn by Mike Henderson with colors by Nolan Woodard and letters by Ariana Mayer. Let me double check that that's the case. Yeah, Ariana Mayer. And it's published by Image, as you guys can see right there with that big eye. And the demographic is adult. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of sex and violence and drug abuse and all sorts of stuff like that. And the genres here are sci-fi, military sci-fi specifically, political, kind of like thriller in this case. This is a different style of arc than the first one. And also space opera, because if you have, you know, politics in space, it's a space opera. And if you have these like very massive empire tech things, it's space opera. So yeah, doesn't have an adaptation, but like I said last time, this would be a really cool science fiction, space opera, animated adult show. I think it'd be really, really nice like that. And the rating for this is a 4.5 out of 5, more or less for the same issues as before. Also added in with the fact that this is a very different type of story compared to the first arc. So in terms of like where it goes, it makes sense, but it wasn't exactly what I was expecting when I finished reading the first arc. And going into this one, there was a little bit of a change that I had to get used to, right? So I'll explain that in more detail in a moment. But basically, the premise of this arc is this political / slice of life arc that is kind of like the lull in the story before the action picks up again. It's very necessary because it is necessary for you to care about these characters, especially if they're going to go back into a war zone and one of them may die, or they might not. I think they will. I think one of them will. And it's important that you care about these characters if that's going to happen, right? So that's where I'm guessing it's going to go. But also because this is a space opera, you need the scheming political side of things, and you need to have the characters that are your main characters be involved in that. And how do you do that? Well, you transplant your characters from the war zone directly into the queen's adobe, right? Into the queen's chambers, if you will. So that's basically what happens here. And the girls happen to end up on Throne World, which is the main world of this empire. And Victory ends up with the queen. The queen kind of happens to be enamored with Victory, for lack of a better term. And the other girls on the team, the other women on the team, end up having shore leave as there's this like political intrigue in the background. So overall, it's really, really well done. I really liked it. I think it's a really good arc. It's just like there was a little bit of tonal whiplash coming in from like the crazy ground pounding action sequences from the previous one into this more sedated kind of vibe, right? So your mileage may vary there. Like it might be good for you or it might not be. It really depends on your preferences. For me, it worked out pretty well. Once I got into the hang of it, once, you know, I understood where it was going, I'd say 20 pages into the first issue in this arc, I kind of understood it, and I was very happy to be where I was, right? So, yeah, basically, the plot line in this case is actually much simpler than before. It's easier to explain, so it'll probably be a shorter video. But essentially, Victory and the rest of the Forge team, plus one of the Cassandras that we met in the first arc, end up on the Queen's throne room. They end up in front of her as she's holding court. And so the Queen is excited. She's like, oh, finally something exciting is happening. Who the hell are you? What's your name? What are you guys doing? And she kind of gushes about the fact that she gets to meet a Forge team because she hasn't met one yet, although she is like the reason why they exist, right? And so Victory, being the leader and the first one to talk, leads the Queen to be interested in her specifically. And so the Queen and her kind of hit it off. They have this kind of like specific type of relationship going forward for this arc that is pretty different from all of the other characters, right? And so we kind of start this one storyline where the Queen and Victory are hanging out together, and they're going through this kind of like get to know you phase, and also this kind of like difficult and almost like very grueling experience for Victory, because she's like, if I say something wrong, I die. and I need to make sure that the queen is like happy with what's going on, right? And so she is like under a lot of stress in that sense. And the queen is also just very excited to see her. She's very excited to kind of, you know, meet someone that is not the usual rabble that she meets, right? So it's kind of interesting in that sense. Eventually, this guy shows up, and he manages to like remove the Forge team from the queen's hands by asking, or by basically admitting that he needs to interrogate them and debrief them so that he knows what's going on. And this guy turns out to be the leader of this spy organization for the queen. I think they're called the Unseen Hand or something like that. And so he manages to get the girls away. He manages to debrief them, get information out of them, and then he calls up his shadow council, basically all of these other people that are supposed to be the heads of this organization. Very similar to Evangelion, actually. There's like a scene that reminds me a lot of one of the scenes in Evangelion where like Gendo is talking to a bunch of stupid lab people. I think it's when they reveal that the impacts are aliens and something, and that the Evangelions are based on alien tech. I think it's from that scene, but it's very similar to that, right? So he's like, you know, there's something else going on. The Cassandra is weird. The information isn't lining up, and there's a problem here, and we need to figure out what's going on. And this is actually set up for a different plot point that happens later, because basically these other heads think that this guy is too paranoid for what he's doing, which is crazy because they're the leaders of a spy organization. You can't be too paranoid if that's the case, right? And so they come up with their own plans to eliminate the Forge team through assassination attempts. And they do this without permission from this main guy. And so this is a problem, right? And so the rest of the story from there is basically Victory managing the queen and kind of dealing with her expectations. She ends up having lunch with her. She ends up having to beat up her guard. And then they kind of end up frolicking in a plant maze somewhere. And they fuck. But also, Victory has to save the queen from an assassination attempt that was actually launched against Victory. And she has to make sure that the queen has no idea that anything is going on. And the Cassandras make her do this, right? So that's one plot line. The other plot line is this spy guy trying to figure out what's going on. And it turns out that there's this plot that the Cassandras are planning, and they actually end up having to sacrifice one of their own to throw him off the trail. So they actually kill one of the Cassandras. I think it's the Cassandra that is at the throne room when the girls show up. But I can't remember. It's one of the ones that we've seen before that was relatively visually apparent, even if not important to the story, right? And so that's a second plot line. And then he has to deal with the assassination attempt thing. And then the rest of the story is basically focusing on Crazy Joe, Harpo, Pusher, and Hap as they go through shore leave. And so Crazy Joe just hits up the bar and she's just having fun and she's trying to find someone to spend the night with. And she gets in a lot of trouble because she's so large and full of fighting vigor that she ends up just hurting a bunch of people, like basically unknowingly or maybe knowingly, but uncaringly, right? And so she gets in trouble at a bar, and then eventually the assassination attempt is this like gang of dudes trying to jump her. Doesn't work. She manages to beat all of them. Then Pusher is off doing drugs for a long time, and then she decides to go into the hospital and save a bunch of people's lives because she's a field medic, but she's also like the best surgeon ever, essentially. And so she's doing that. And then her assassination attempt is someone trying to come in from behind and trying to stab her with this, like, I guess you could call it an ice pick, basically, like a laser ice pick that they're trying to stab her with in order to basically kill her in some way. I think they're trying to cauterize something in her heart so that her heart can't pump blood, basically. Cut some sort of, artery or something without it being noticeable. Or trying to go through her brain. I think it's through her heart, but I don't remember. But she manages to see it coming, and she manages to remove the threat. Harpo is actually at the shooting range. She spends a lot of time just playing with guns. That's her kind of hobby. And she's actually flirting with the owner or slash the person in charge of this shooting range that is military only, right? And so she ends up going on a date with this woman, and their date actually starts with an assassination attempt, very similar to the assassination that happens in Star Wars Attack of the Clones, where Jango Fett kills the changeling, like kind of just from far away, and then they have to chase them. It's very similar to Star Wars in that sense, and that kind of scene from the Coruscant underworld. And then eventually it turns out that they managed to deal with the issue because Harpo is a better sniper than any of these people that were hired for the job. And she gets to take her girlfriend home for the night, right? So, and then Hap is hanging out at university. She just goes to classes and tries to tell people that they're wrong. And I actually like her character a lot. But while she's doing this, and she's kind of hanging out in this like precarious situation, someone tries to basically break this area where she's standing so that there's like some sort of rock slide or some malfunction, and she dies she like falls to her death, right? She manages to deal with the issue as well. I think she like puts a rock through someone's face or something. And she manages to deal with that as well. So overall, they manage to deal with all of the issues. They know they're under attack, and so they're preparing to mobilize, where the guy from before shows up and he's like, don't worry, I had nothing to do with your assassination attempts. Here's all the heads of all the people that were involved as a sorry. And then he ships him off to fight off this incoming threat, right? So that's basically where the arc ends, and I'm very excited to see where it goes next, right? So yeah, in terms of characters, we get introduced to the Queen. She's very different from what you would expect. She's very irreverent and not very like queenly. And I think this is because if she's technically lived for 8 million years, she's probably bored as hell of her life, right? And so she's irreverent and kind of like Deadpool-esque in a sense to protect herself from this boredom. And so I find her being very different from what you would expect to be understandable and also interesting, not really what you're expecting. There's a nice subversion of expectations here that I liked. I think it worked well. Davian is the guy that is the leader of the spy organization, and he's really cool as well. I like him a lot. There's a bunch of new Cassandras, but they're not really important. I think none of them are actually important this arc. And then it builds up a lot of the forged characters, right? So overall, this is a character building arc. If you're not interested, maybe you can skip it and just jump into the next arc. I'm not really sure. I wouldn't recommend that, but I can see it being a viable option on rereads, right? So, yeah, I think it works well in the sense that the first arc had to get you invested in the story, and so that's why it was so like nonstop action. And it makes sense that now that you're invested in these characters, you slow down to give you the character development that you need, right? And so I think this works out really well. I think it's a good strategy. However, the kind of tonal shift between the two things is difficult to parse to an extent, especially because there's a big gap of months between these two arcs, right? So someone that stopped reading after the third issue, waited a bunch of months, and then wanted to jump into issue 4, and then suddenly it's not really what they were expecting. I can see that being a problem. I can see that being a big negative. And I don't really know. I didn't really hear anyone talking about this throughout the months last year. So I'm not really sure that anyone actually read this, but I did, and I really liked it. I think it worked out really nicely. And I think this will be a better read in terms of like trades or in a larger collected edition than, you know, individually, right? So, yeah. In terms of world building, we introduced you Throne World and a lot of cool, interesting world building aspects of Throne World, but nothing too important. It's stuff that in a movie you would just kind of see in the background, and you might have some commentary from the characters explaining this or that, right? It's kind of like when you go to Naboo, you don't really like have anyone telling you all of the information about why Naboo is the way it is. You just get to see it and understand that this is the styling of this world, right? And so what they do instead is actually give you a bunch of essays at the back that explain some of the things about this world to kind of pad it out and make it more interesting. And I like that. I think it works nicely. So, yeah. Otherwise, it sets up the spy group and the Cassandra's plotting. That's basically all of the world building aspects here. In terms of artwork and fan service, again, the artwork is phenomenal. The colors are great. There's a little bit more sex in this. There's a little bit more, well, nothing explicit, but, you know, there were 2 implicit moments where there was sex happening in the book, and you know it because they lead up to it, right? So, this is more explicit in the sense that these things are actually happening, but it's only because they're in a position where they can actually engage with this with characters without having to like stop fighting, right? So it makes sense that it happens and it works out pretty well. Same face syndrome is really big in this one because there's like 50 Cassandras plus all of the Forge plus the Queen. They all look really similar. However, because of the fact that they're all clones, it makes sense. However, because they also made them distinct enough from each other that you can tell them apart, it works out pretty well. It also kind of exacerbates the issue a little bit. So, you know, you take the wins with the losses, I guess, in that sense. Yeah, I'm not really sure how it works still. Like, I don't understand why all of the Forge and Cassandras don't look exactly like the Queen, because it's one of the things that isn't explained. And I guess it doesn't have to be, because it is kind of implied that it's probably because they're using genetic material from men to create them. But at the same time, since it's never explicitly said, it's just a weird quirk of their biology, I guess. So I don't know. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But, you know, these are the types of questions that I end up with when I read this. So ratings-wise, 4.5 out of 5. The art was good, but like I said before, because you weren't really sure what you were getting the first time that you read this, you might have a problem with it. And I definitely did have that problem. However, at the end of the day, it is a great story. I really enjoy myself reading it. I just had that kind of stumble at the beginning that I think is a big enough negative to discount half a point off, right? So 4.5 out of 5 for me. If they manage to nail the next arc without any like transition issues, I think it'll be a 5 out of 5, and I will be very, very happy with that. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Forged Arc 2. Let me know what you thought down below, and thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.